I was in two minds whether to make this video because I felt it may overcomplicate things for some people, and this is going to get a little bit abstract. But let's see how we get on. Let's see what you make of this, and then you can let me know at the end whether you think it's something that's helpful or not. Let's think about this. When we are noticing our thoughts, or noticing our emotions, or noticing our feelings in our body, then there must be a part of us that is doing that noticing. But what is that part? What is that part that notices? And can we use that part to our benefit? One way we can look at this is through different types of self. Take, for instance, that we have a physical self. You can hold your hands out in front of you and you can see your physical self. You know that you're here. You know there's something there. Now let's think about this. Have you ever heard of the ship of Theseus paradox? Okay, so there's this ship. It's been put to good use. It's been sailing around the seas, and some of the boards, some of the wood is starting to decay. So those boards get replaced with new boards. If I replace just one board, is it still the same ship? If I replace two boards, is it still the same ship? If I replace 10 boards, is it still the same ship? At what point, if any, does it cease to be the same ship? If I replaced 50% with new wood, is it still the ship of Theseus? If I replaced 99% of the wood, is it still the same ship? What happens if I go over that 99% and I've replaced every single part of that ship? Is it still the same ship? It's an interesting question. Let's relate this to us. I'm Stuart. If I cut my hair, am I still Stuart? If I cut my fingernails and toenails, am I still Stuart? If I cut off my finger, am I still Stuart? How about if I cut off my arm? Am I still Stuart? Am I still me? So this is starting to change my physical self here quite dramatically, but let's keep going. If I cut off both of my legs, am I still me? Am I still Stuart? You can see where I'm going with this. How much would I have to cut off to stop being me? And just as a side note here, the ship of Theseus paradox got extended at some point to include the question, if we gathered up all of the rotten planks that got replaced and put all those rotten planks back together to form a ship, so we've got the ship that everything has been replaced on, and then all the original bits have been made into another ship, which of the two ships is now classed as the ship of Theseus? Similarly, there's this idea that most of the atoms in the human body get replaced every year, or at least every 5 years, or something like that. The exact science behind this isn't important for this. But let's just say that as those atoms are replaced, we can somehow collect the old ones and contain them in some way. Then when we have all of the atoms, we put them all back together again to make another person. Which one is the real you? There's no answers to these questions. These are just to get you thinking. So we have this physical self where we need to be quite flexible in how we view that. Then we have what we could call the thinking self. So try this really quick exercise. Just close your eyes, and as a thought enters your head, any thought, it doesn't matter what it is, see if you can notice where that thought or where those thoughts are coming from. Are they coming from in front of you? Are they behind you? Do they come from the side? Do they move from left to right or right to left? Do they move from in front of you to behind you, or behind you to in front of you? maybe they just appear. Maybe in the same place, maybe in different places. And when they come, are they words? Or do you see them as text? Or maybe you see images? And as you do this, notice that you are able to notice. There is the thinking, the images and words that your mind is producing, but there is also you noticing that. There is the thought, and there is you noticing the thought. There is the thought, and there is you noticing the thought. So open your eyes again. Those thoughts that come to your mind change all the time. The images, the pictures, the words, they are always changing. But that part of you that notices this happening doesn't change. It's constant. Again, what is this part that does the noticing? This part that is constant. Well, some have labelled it something called the observing self. It observes what you are experiencing. A helpful way to think about this is using the metaphor of a documentary. Have you watched any documentaries lately? What kind of things have you seen in them? Maybe they were nature documentaries, travel documentaries, or documentaries about specific people and their lives. Some documentaries can be quite negative, sometimes quite accusatory. Other times they can be really positive and celebrate someone's life and all the good things that they've done. But let's just take a minute to think about how biased these documentaries can be. Think of the amount of footage that must be captured. Thousands and thousands of hours sometimes. And what happens to all of that footage? Because you don't get to see thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of documentary. It gets cut down to a few minutes of the most entertaining, the most emotive, the most dramatic shots, and then they get edited together to tell a story that represents that thing. What you see on the TV is completely at the mercy of the producer or the director. So let's suppose I gave you a 1-hour documentary about the Amazon rainforest. Does that 1-hour documentary represent all of the rainforest? What about if I gave you 100 hours of the documentary, or 100,000 hours? You would see on the TV pictures that represent the Amazon rainforest. Maybe different plants, different animals, maybe some footage of some tribes that live there. You might hear other people's opinions who have travelled there for themselves. But would that be close to actual reality? Would it be the same as actually experiencing the rainforest? What happens if one director wanted to show all the cool animals and all their vibrant colours and the way they find food and their habitats and how beautiful the environment is? And then another director wanted to show all of the man-made damage and deforestation and all the destruction. Which one of those documentaries would be the real rainforest? Watching the rainforest on TV would be nothing like the actual rainforest in real life. The two experiences are very different. One is a story about the rainforest, one is the actual rainforest. Let me just say that again. One is the story about the rainforest, and one is the actual rainforest. Let's relate this back to the human mind. As I have said many times on this channel, the human mind is the world's best storyteller. It is like that documentary's film crew, except ours is filming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, by the time you reach the age of 30, you would have 250,000 hours of footage. And without getting too caught up on the specific mechanisms and science of how much of this do we actually store in our memory, it's not even 1%. Think about how much you can remember about earlier today, in detail. How about last Tuesday? How about the second Wednesday of last month? Maybe that happened to be a birthday or some special occasion, you could recall some aspects of that day in general, but even then you wouldn't be able to recall every little detail that had passed through your eyes or every sound you had heard. So what do you get from your mind? You get a very biased documentary about who you are, and over 99% of the original footage has been cut. So your mind goes, this 1%, this is you. This is what defines you. Remember that Name the Story video I've put up before? It's on the channel. Well, this connects here. You might have a name for this documentary. It's the You're Not Good Enough documentary. It's the You're Always Going to Fail documentary. So if a documentary about the Amazon rainforest isn't the Amazon rainforest, then a documentary about you is not you. And no matter what that documentary shows, whether it's right or wrong, true or false, positive or negative, old or new, facts or opinions, that documentary can never be you. And you know how you can tell the documentary isn't you? You can step back and watch it. If you can watch the documentary, you cannot be the documentary. In the same way that we were playing with our thoughts earlier. If you can notice the thought, you can't be the thought. But why would we want to develop this? I think there's a few reasons, which I'm going to keep brief in this video as it's already getting pretty long. But firstly, it gives us a more stable sense of self. You know, things can change around us. Our circumstances can change. Our situations can change. But there's always this constant of who we are. That constant part of us that notices, that observes. And secondly, a lot of other skills we do, like noticing and naming thoughts, feelings and emotions, it can be helpful to understand there's a position from which we do this noticing. Like the sky and the weather, our observing self is like the sky, and what is noticed is the weather contained within it. The sky contains the weather. The weather changes, but the sky is constant. Thirdly, and if you want, I can make another video about this as it's specifically trauma related, but there's this idea called event centrality, where what we find is when someone construes a traumatic event or a traumatic history as central to their identity, then it can reinforce and maintain those symptoms or that presentation or that experience. So being able to get some separation between the trauma and what's happened and the self-identity and self-concept can be really helpful. A lot to discuss there, and I can't do that justice just in this video. I know this video is longer than usual. I did think about breaking it down into separate exercises and ideas, but I thought it might become a bit disjointed that way. As I said before, I was in two minds about whether to make this video or not. It's a very small part of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. There is nothing that says you have to understand this or you have to work on this. There is nothing that says if you don't do this, you won't become psychologically flexible. Okay, there's plenty of other things in ACT and in other modalities that you can do, that you can try, that are probably going to be helpful for you. The reason I say that is because I don't want people sat there thinking, oh my gosh, I've got no idea what Strider's going on about here. I have no idea whatsoever what any of this means. Hopefully some of the exercises I've got coming up in later videos, in conjunction with this video, will make this topic a little bit more approachable if you do want to take a closer look at this or try to understand this a bit more. But like I said, you don't have to. It's just an invitation. I hope you did find something of use here. Maybe some of the thought experiments were quite interesting. Maybe it's shifted your perspective a little bit about how you view yourself. Look out for the Observing Self guided exercise that's coming soon. Once it's up, I'll link to that one in the description. Take care. Goodbye.